Because perfect love casts out fear.
Yeah.
Imposter syndrome is fear. Needing to validate yourself and feel significant. That's all based out of fear. And knowing you are loved opens up that abundance, opens up not needing to strive, because you're rooted in who you are, and you realize you are not your art.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a really important episode. Talking about how your upbringing relates to, how your upbringing links to the way we relate to our creativity and our art. I feel like it's something that's not really talked about. I haven't heard this topic talked about. And it's really just about knowing, am I creating from a place of love and fullness and out of a place of rest, or am I creating from a place of ego, or just a sense of endless striving to prove something? And I think thinking about the way we're raised can help with that, help peel back those layers.
Sorry, I was admiring your leggings.
Oh yeah.
I'm just noticing how shiny they are. I like them.
Thanks. I don't wear them much. Back to the conversation. Yeah, so I don't know if you've heard, but psychology always talks about how your personality is formed in this first 7 years of your life.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot.
And so I feel like that always comes up when you're talking about relationships, or how you relate to other people, or just your general personality. It's interesting to think about how that correlates with the way you approach art.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's something I know we've both been thinking about lately. So, yeah, how would you describe your upbringing, Bria?
Ooh. Loaded question. So in relation to, I guess, how my creativity was formed, my parents were super very supportive the whole time. They noticed from maybe 4 or 5 that I was really into drawing, and I was really into building little models and things like that. So kind of right away, you get labeled as the creative kid, and people get you painting sets and watercolors and the typical things like that. And I genuinely was good at it, and so that very quickly became people's sort of go-to compliment, you're the creative one or whatever, why don't you draw this picture for me, why don't you draw a picture for grandma and that'll be your card. And that would happen in school too. A teacher maybe would use something that I did as the example or something, and my picture would go on the fridge or something like that. So yeah, that was early adolescence, and I knew even too, as even a 5-year-old, that I wanted to be an artist. That was my first sort of dream dream job, I guess. And I didn't get into fashion until about maybe middle school or something, but that's still creative too. So I was on that path for a while, and doing sewing, doing videos and things like that with my sister, doing photography, doing graphic design, messing around with my pirated Photoshop, all that contributed to all these different things I would do. And I was lucky enough to go to this. It wasn't my main high school, but it was a school that I went to for half the day after my main high school, where we got to do fine arts. So I got to do painting and black and white, chemical photography, digital photography, video. That's where I actually learned how to use like Final Cut, like pro editing programs. Sculpture, that was super cool. Printmaking, and painting, that's more like developed in how to actually like stretch a canvas and use gesso and things like that. So that was like, that really set me on a path too. And again, parents super supportive, you know, taking me to all these different college trips to see what works. Went to the after school art school thing. That was really awesome. Did that for 2 years. Got this body of work. Parents super proud. You know, put me in programs and contests and things like that. And like I said before, doing like photography and the video, I did a lot of like random things like that with my sister. So doing like photo shoots, and we made a little YouTube production, I think I've showed you, where we made like a season or 2 of a drama series. So honestly, all of that experience gave me a lot of honestly, it gave me a huge ego. A huge ego as far as me being a creative as my identity, and being known as that person, being that go-to for people if they wanted a drawing, or they wanted to decorate their room or something, or they wanted to decorate a party, or they wanted advice on their outfit. They were like, oh, like, she's the one. And you know, that became very evident in how I viewed myself as far as my work, and how I pursued work, but also just empowering in general, like feeling like, oh, you know, if I can do some DIY YouTube production, then I can build a shelf, you know, I can you know, make shoes from scratch, you know, like that was my attitude for a while toward things, and going shopping, it like just ruined shopping. So I would go around, see something and be like, oh, I can make that, and then justify that as like not buying it, even though that got old really fast. So yeah. And then honestly, going to a school like Parsons, where everyone is super creative and everyone has that edge, you would think that that would humble me a little bit, because it's like we're all sort of on equal playing ground, so to speak. But if anything, it just intensified it. It just made me more competitive, made me compare a lot more, and kind of like make me want to push myself even further as far as the diversity of my skill sets, and being even more innovative and things like that. So yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I was raised, I mean, I guess similar in the sense that I guess I knew I wanted to pursue an artistic path from a very young age. But with me, it was the help like of my mom, because at 6 I really wasn't thinking about that. I knew I was drawing. I was an only child, so like, and I had a vivid imagination, so I was very creative just in how I entertained myself being an only child. And she saw like one of my drawings I drew of like my kindergarten teacher. I think I mentioned this in another episode. And from then on, like, I was put into art classes, but I really loved it. And I was raised in a kind of volatile household, so I didn't realize at the time, but like going to those Saturday morning weekly art classes was really like therapeutic. And like, yeah, we didn't learn like conceptual stuff or anything, but like we learned a bunch of different like techniques, from just oil painting, acrylic, drawing, sculpture, clay making. It was really fun, and it was like kind of a small group of kids, kind of semi-private, so I love that experience. And then she would enter us into like local art shows, and so I did that. I was also just pushed to dream in general. Like my mom put me in all kinds of, I was exposed to just a lot Also like dance and ballet. I was even in like zoo classes. Like I was just like pushed to explore.
What is it, zoo classes?
Yeah, like you go to the zoo and like
okay.
learn
I
about
didn't even know that
animals.
was a thing.
Aquarium classes too. I did that. I did all kinds of things, but art is the thing that like took. Yeah, and then going into kind of middle school, that was kind of when I knew I wanted to do fashion design. So I was very focused on that. Like I took sewing classes. I prepared to get into like this local art school in New Orleans where they didn't have fashion, but they had costume design, which was like close enough at the time to get me where I wanted to go. And like I was very much like on that track to like in high school. We produced our own fashion show, and like made all the decisions on like the lighting and the set. That was really cool. And just making things, working on my portfolio on my spare time, helping with theater productions at my other school, my public high school, because I went to 2 different high schools. So that was really like kind of what my life kind of revolved around for years.
That's cool to be exposed so early to that, like especially having a fashion show that young. Yeah,
and my mom, like, my parents were supportive of anything I wanted to do. So since art was that thing, it's like they just pushed me.
Yeah.
Especially like my mother, to just be the best also. So it's like I was pushed to explore and dream, but I was also pushed to be the best, and I have to be perfect.
Yeah.
Have to make all A's. So like even academically, I had to like, just be perfect. I kind of had like low key, like a tiger parent. Well, not low key, high key. I was also raised in a very like conservative household, so like I am naturally a goody two shoes, but like I was also like that was even enforced in my household.
Yeah,
just always do good, make right decisions. I was chastised if I made B's, so it's like that's also like a big juxtaposition from being pushed to dream and be an artist to being pushed to be like having all my I's dotted and my T's crossed. And I didn't realize it at the time until I got older and like post college, but it caused a lot of cognitive dissonance. I feel like and so like what do you get when you're like nurtured in the household where it's like you're pushed to be creative and dream and you're supported, but you're also kind of pressured to be perfect. It makes like this really ambitious creative person. Plus communally, like my church home, I was seen as a child of promise, and then being an only child, getting so much attention from my parents, out of my cousins, I was like the child who made all the right decisions. So I was kind of like a child of promise. And then my church is also very prophetic, so like they prophesied and affirmed those creative dreams I had. So it was like a lot of affirmation and like encouragement, which was powerful, but also like a lot of pressure, which I didn't realize at the time. I was just like, I'm going to Parsons, moving to New York. I was amped. So that's kind of my upbringing. So with you, it's like, how would you say your upbringing affects the way, or has affected the way that you relate to your art or identify with your creativity?
So first of all, I definitely relate to having that pressure. I mean, it wasn't like I didn't have like a prophecy like over me, like that's like a lot, but People would say a lot of things to me like, oh, if I had your skills, I would be doing this, this, and this, and this, and this. Yeah, and it's just
projecting all of
yeah, and it always made me feel, I don't know, it made me feel like I was wasting potential if I didn't do those things. Because and then, especially as like a teenager in early 20s, this is like, I don't really know yet what I'm about and what I want to do with my life. And people keep saying to me like, oh, like, you should start a line, or, you know, you should, you know, have a costume gig, or take this internship and take this job. And
what's next?
Yeah, it's just like, or just things that I don't even care about. Like, let me think of an example. Let me think of a good one. I can't think of a good one right now, but just people saying a lot of stuff that I didn't really care about, you know, like, oh, like, you should you should be a dancer or something, or, you know, you should make your own, like, when I was in the tapestries for a little bit, they're like, oh, you should, like, make this a business. And it's just like, I'm just exploring.
I was in an Uber ride a couple of years back in New Orleans, and the Uber driver was saying how I should design like brassieres for like different size women.
Yeah,
like, it's not.
Yeah, it's funny how people just immediately project their own stuff onto you.
Yeah,
like, I guess. But I would feel bad about it because it made me feel like I was being ungrateful or something. So that was kind of like a smaller thing, but a bigger deal was just, again, going back to that work's identity. Like, feeling like, okay, I am creative, and this is how I do my work, and if I'm not being creative, like, what am I doing? How am I adding value? And it just, and I'm not even saying, like, I'm super completely free from this, because this still bubbles up with me sometimes, but it just created all this restlessness, because it was like, if I wasn't pumping out some kind of project, some kind of, you know, new design, some kind of, you know, something I'm working on, it made me feel like I'm not living, which is like such a high bar to live up to. It's just like, just rest. I really needed rest. And I had kind of a critical moment one time. I was in Los Angeles, and this was during that same job, like my first major job out of college, where we were pumping out like 400 prints a day. So I was already like kind of burnt out, already being creative on the job. So doing my own thing was like really hard anyway. But I had that mental pressure, like, I gotta do something. You know, I'm in LA, and like people are expecting me to do things, you know, this is what this has all been working up toward. And I remember I was sitting in my room one day, and I was trying to make like a fancy planner or something, and I finally did the planner, and it looked all pretty, but I was like, I don't have any plans. And I wanted to draw, because I was like, I'm not inspired, I need to draw. I was like, let me just do some figure drawing, you know, get in the zone, get in my flow. But like in my mind, I'm like going a little bit crazy. Like, that's what's happening. I'm like starting to crack a little bit. And it's like 15 minutes to close to Michael's. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to drive to Michael's super quick, get like a jumbo drawing pad and some charcoal. We're just going to spread out and be super cliche about it. So that's happening. I'm like rushing, driving to Michael's. Low-key kind of angry at God because I'm not feeling inspired. And I'm thinking, the back of my, like, Holy Spirit in me is like, you should pray. But another part of me was like, I don't feel like praying. Like, I'm angry at God. And I was like, God knows where to find me. And like, I'm driving to Michael's. Yeah, like, God can find me at Michael's.
Seems like you're always driving to Michael's rushed. Yeah.
I do occasionally go to Michael's during the daytime. But
last week we were rushing to Michael's. Yeah.
I'm so sorry to all the Michael's employees. But yeah, I come back and I draw. And like, It was okay, but it wasn't this magical moment of like the flow or inspiration. It didn't even look pretty. It was just like it was just
I did this for this.
Yeah, it was like I spent like 40 minutes on it, and I hated it. And I think I just started like crying because I was just like, oh, like God, like, are you taking away my gifts? Like, why would you do this? Like, how I'm supposed to be inspired? Like, why would you even make me creative if I'm not inspired all the time? And I don't even remember how I found it, but I ended up finding this really, really good sermon series from Door of Hope Church, the one that we talked about, talking about work. And honestly, that has become such a passion for me because work is a big deal. We spend at least 8 hours a day, at work. We spend a lot of our time at work. And so it's really important to consider our relationship to it. And in this series, they go through the book of Ecclesiastes, which, if you've ever read it,
it's a good book.
Yeah, it's a little like depressing and like nihilistic at first because it talks about how a lot of it in the beginning
is meaningless.
Yeah, it's like everything is hevel, everything is meaningless, everything is smoke, everything is sandcastles and bath bombs, like we were saying that time. But it was really refreshing, and it taught me, like, not even taught, it's more like remember, like, obviously God is our only source. God is our only thing that we should be worshiping and allowing to fill our cup. And if we don't have that, it doesn't really matter what gifts I have. You know what I mean? I can't rely on my own creativity to give me life. And I really had to just step back from my own expectations of it. You know what I mean? Because as much as I love my creativity, it's like it doesn't compare to the Creator, like the glory of God. And I also realized in that season, like, my idea of inspiration was kind of fake, like in my opinion now, I feel like inspiration is more so about really just hearing from God. Like, that is inspiration, at least the most pure form, I guess. I think before, what I was thinking was inspiration was really just kind of Frankensteining things together, you know what I mean, and making this sort of synthesizing things in my mind,
That's what we learned in art school too.
Yeah, and you can get away with that for a while, but
if you don't feel a connection to it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think because I was working that job where I'm doing that on a daily basis and not having any kind of resonance with what I'm making, it was just like, what's going on? Like, nothing's connecting to me. This is pointless. I also hated that job. but yeah, and I wanted to, if you don't mind, I wanted to read a little excerpt from my feeling zine, because it talks about idolization of work, which is what I was feeling at the time, and I think that's when this began as far as my thoughts on it. And then years later, it came together in this zine. So this is what spoke to me. I'm going to read it out loud. So the book of Ecclesiastes tells us there are 3 issues with putting our hope in work. When you die, you cannot take any of your winnings with you, for they are like smoke, bath bombs, and sandcastles, satisfying yet fleeting. Pursue a passion, and you will work endlessly because your identity is all wrapped up in it. Or 3, work cannot give you identity because there is always competition in the global playing field threatening your person. We internalize the notion of making our mark on this world, choosing to compare, trying to justify our existence. But identity cannot be created, it must be given to you from your Creator. And then it goes down. You are trying your hardest to make it happen, but it was never your job to have it all together. Not in our limited human strength alone. Our gift is grace, love, and the work is done in Christ. May we only take hold and surrender to it. No amount of education, of strategizing, of planning, of stress, of recounting steps, of meditation, of calculations, of labor, of late nights, of money, of influence, of beauty, of time, of charisma, of anything will get it done if you didn't lay it before God, who is your helper, your collaborator, your God, your Savior. Open your palm and let it go. Revelation 12:11 reads, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. It's really that last part that speaks to me, because I think I was holding on so much to my creative life that I envisioned that I was really missing out on life itself, missing out on God.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, all of that was kind of my major breakthrough as far as putting me on a right path for my creative future, and also just starting this other thing of being more humble with it, you know, because I mentioned earlier how, because there was so much praise around my creativity from such a young age, it's almost like that became a love language for me, you know. It was like if people didn't recognize my own, I'd put effort into a pattern I made or something, or, you know, a painting I did, and if people didn't give me that praise for it, it felt like they didn't love me as a person, you know, which is like really deep. And that literally was like through adulthood, you know what I mean? So it's like that was a big deal, especially when you have to be creative for work. And then it's like you're having all this disillusion and doubt at work, and like all this anxiety was coming up. So I had to recognize that and realize, like, no, like I'm allowed to like be a person separate from my creativity, and my value does not come from that, you know. It's, and just leaning into the rest of not having to be creative all the time, and also being able to just, like, this is kind of separate, but like delegating and not pushing myself, you know, because when you have that restlessness, you want to work all the time. And I have literally had like literal physical body limitations. Like last year, Parsons, I had that seizure. Moving from California, I had the nerve damage. That was super humbling because I had to always ask people to do stuff for me, like even as simple as mixing like pancakes, you know. So that was extremely humbling, and those experiences ring in my mind when I am tempted to sort of get my head in the clouds again, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So yeah, a lot. It was definitely, all that stuff from my childhood was definitely like deeply ingrained. It took a while to recognize it, but yeah, I really had grace, to be honest. So.
Really interesting. I resonate with all that, especially what you said about that became your love language.
Yeah.
I think with me, the way it played out was gradually recognizing the imposter syndrome I really had. And I think I started kind of recognizing it in college, but not really. Like, we went to a very intense school, so like the most talented people in the world.
It's funny because that's not even an exaggeration.
It's not, yeah. And like those Koreans and Chinese, they came like knowing Photoshop, like they came in like 100 steps ahead of like the Americans and the European. It was just like
very intimidating.
Yeah, and I had a couple of my core design classes with my roommate. Someone I lived with like most of college, 3 years out of the 4 years I was there. And so one class, she actually pointed this out, but every critique I would like point out before even anyone could, like, I would present what I did, and then I would point out what was lacking, and like I would critique it myself before
that's interesting.
anyone would even say anything. I guess that looks like it's not ego, but it was really imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And just like, but I didn't even realize it. To me, it was just like, oh yeah, this is what's wrong with it, and then now critique it. And then my room would be like, you need to like shut up. Like, why are you keep like, yeah, it's like you're trying to like beat people to the punch of like what's wrong, like just present it.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And so I kind of like let that slide. I just missed that, like, oh, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But as I got into like, I guess further, it's like you said, it's like we were pushed to. It was beautiful as we were pushed to explore and like diversify our skill sets.
Yeah.
But especially leading up towards thesis, I became more and more competitive and like. Even though my thesis was something that I deeply cared about, it was like I made like. It was a collection that was like engineered to adapt to different body types. Mm-hmm. So it's like literally like the pants had like kind of different ways you can tie them based on like if really you're pear shaped or if you're, you know, another kind of shape. So it's like I don't know where my words are right now. And so it's like I knew it was something I genuinely cared about, and I liked projects. I liked abstract projects, but also liked projects that like required me to talk to people and do kind of social research. Mm-hmm. So that was very interesting to me. But I was also in the back of my mind doing this like, oh, this is like a winning concept, you know, like Parsons is all about social issues and being progressive and like making the world a better place, you know. It's like either you design like you're from Japan or like you make the world a better place. Like that's how you make it to Japan.
Those are the two options.
That's how you win, you know?
Yeah.
And like I made cool stuff. I made cool abstract stuff. Like people like my stuff. But like I was like, you know, and like all this was at the back of my mind. I wasn't even conscious of this. It was like, you know what? Like I'm gonna go the social route. And it was also helpful because I learned how to design real clothes that weren't just like abstract things, which I was doing all through like since I got there till junior year. But it was like, man, like when I graduated, it's like this, it's like, I don't know, it's like a lot of people, that's another conversation, because a lot of people went to school, they were branding themselves. That was another thing that put pressure on. They were branding themselves for like the global fashion marketplace. Like they had their Instagram ready. They were hiring stylists and creative directors for their shoots, like for their pieces. I looked at it like every collection I did was totally different. I was playing. I was there to like explore.
Yeah, it's school.
But like I didn't even my thesis, even though I was trying to win and be in the panel and all that stuff, I wasn't thinking after that. You know, I was like, you know, and like. Kind of like how you were saying, like people were like the dean at Parsons was like, oh, like are you gonna start a business with this? And I was just like, no, like I'm not. I'm, like this is like an ending. Like I'm over this, this concept. Where am I going with this? I don't know. But yeah, but just I remember this is a very specific thing that. I think I told you this before, and you were like, your mean is not mean at all, but I thought it was mean. Like, in my certain... Because we had sections, which were, like, our individual classes, but you would spend all your school year, thesis year, with, like, that same 15 group of students. And so I remember we were talking about one of the girls who was, like, in the running to be, like, designer of the year. And, like, we were kind of, like, pointing out the loopholes or, like, the gaps in her project. And, like, I was telling one of my classmates who I was, like, kind of friends with, I was just like, you know, when you're designing, it's like, does the world really need this, though? Or is it just, like, something to, like, get the deans of Parsons' attention, you know? Because it was kind of, like, not really practical. It was, like, a save the world kind of thing, but it also was, like, not the most practical. But still, like, a noble feat, you know, to even try to do. And, like, after I said that, it's like, I was, you know, there were a few other people around. I was like, man, I look like a jerk. Like, who am I? You know, like, it's like, even though I didn't trash her project, but just saying that, like, what she's designing is not something the world needs. Because I'm just, like, competitive and I want to make it to, like, designer of the year or whatever, like... Yeah, it's just... By the time I got out of Parsons, I realized not even as soon as I graduated because I was on a high, but when I started applying for real jobs a year later and like getting into like kind of like just busting out things, that bottom line mentality, just produce, which is not healthy and realistic for a creative person. It's like I realized that I lost touch with not only my first love, God, but like why I even fell in love with art in the first place.
Yeah.
Because in college it was about winning and beating people, but you're trying to act like you're not competing, you know.
Yeah.
And then in the workforce it's about just these bottom line numbers and productivity and efficiency. Yeah. And it's like, man, I don't enjoy any of this. Like this mindset is not conducive to like creating in a healthy way and I define creative health as you're not looking for your creativity to fulfill you or like validate you or to like make you win or prove something to someone, but it's like really a vessel that connects you with the creator and aligns you and kind of a process you go on with him. And through whatever you create, it's like you learn something and then you can share that with other people if it's meant to be shared.
Yeah.
But it's a journey, and like I lost touch with, even though art school is all about the process, culturally it was about being the best. Yeah. And that was the mentality. And I lost touch with that. And like I was letting creativity become a means to an end, a means to fulfill me. And like going back to my upbringing, making me feel special.
Yeah.
Being the best, because I was pressured to like be the best if you're gonna do art. You're like, and I was just like as I started the workforce, and I realized that's really not how I'm wired. I'm not wired to just work.
Yeah, I don't think any of us are.
Yeah, especially creatives, because like we operate in like bursts of energy, most of us, versus like that 8-hour, 10-hour day where you're just drawing, but it doesn't really resonate with you.
Yeah.
And then your sketch, and then designing your sketches change so many times by the time the sales team
it's
it on,
totally
because it's about what the market wants.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that's realistic.
No, it is, but it's also very defeating.
Yeah, it is. And that's another podcast episode. Realizing you resonate more with the arts world than the design world, but that's another conversation. But yeah, as that, and then in the work setting as well, even though it wasn't like competitive like art school, just never feeling enough, even like not so much with the creativity, but the productivity, like I'm not doing these tech packs or these flats fast enough, or like I don't work efficiently. That's not efficiency. I can be efficient, but like being efficient all the time is not really my strength. But ideation is, research is, brainstorming ideas is, but like that's not often valued in like a 9-to-5 setting, especially in the fast-moving fashion world. So they're just not feeling enough in that area and just feeling like I'm failing. And so, and then my life at home, I wasn't creative. I was burnout. I was depressed because I felt like I was failing. I was depressed because like I went to art school, but it's like, okay, like I don't even enjoy this anymore. It's like, and then, you're asking God, like, why am I not inspired and I have these gifts?
Yeah.
Like, it's like you just, like, zapped it from me. But it's like, no, like, this was necessary for you to, like, when you hit rock bottom, you get anchored. If you allow yourself to be. If you allow God to do the work in your heart. And I've been anchored. Still, I mean, you could still get more and more anchored. But
it's like you have to come to the end of your idols for God to really start reshaping what he actually purposed those gifts for,
Yeah. And then at the same time, it's like this disillusionment with the fashion industry, and realizing I didn't, the usual kind of pace of it is like I didn't really resonate with. Visiting home and then people wondering what you're doing, and then I'm going from job hopping from job to job.
Dude,
because everything's a bad fit.
And
people are like, oh, when are you going to start the line? What's next? It's always what they're asking.
It's always the question, what's next?
Yeah, and it's just like, I don't even like this anymore. Even though like, it's like, even though internally I did, but it's just like my experiences have just, put such a damper on this, but you don't know how to communicate that. And people don't get it.
Yeah.
I tried to explain it to, like, people who are not in fashion, like, they don't get it because it's like such a glamorized image. So what do you mean?
It's hard to appreciate if you're not in that.
Yeah, so you can only vent to your fashion school, and that's isolating. But also, like, when I was in church, and like people would just, like those people have just the gift of discernment, and like just super prophetic. People would just come up to me, who I didn't know. I was fairly new to my church at the time, and one person, he was just like, he was just praying like that, the spirit of just striving. And like there's a good striving, striving for success, putting your best foot forward. But striving, when you're talking about it in a biblical sense, is like that works mindset, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Trying to do it all in your own strength and working for validation, working for identity, which we already have in Christ.
Yeah.
And he like pointed out that striving mentality that I was carrying, and like also just this is another biblical concept, just like that the cares of this world would just like fall off me, because I was so obsessed with like establishing myself, being successful as a designer or as a creative, that it's like I wasn't.
Yeah, I love that you said that, just because I feel like when people say cares of the world, usually that's not the things that people immediately think of, but it's like that is a big deal. Like that's always that's constantly reinforced in culture and the way people talk about success and stuff like that.
Yeah. And that's not as the listeners who are listening to these episodes, like a lot of the main thing we're driving home is like creativity is to connect you with your creator, and it's supposed to be play and like a process and a journey you go on. Yeah. So it's like when you're doing it for identity, it's not fun. Yeah. And it's toxic. And so between my spiritual community and just the series of unfortunate events that were my bad fit jobs, that's how I realized like I was off. I was not aligned. Yeah. And to be like a spirit-led creative, you have to be aligned with him. And in order to be aligned, like, he has to be your first love. But it's not like we can't in and of ourselves love God that much. But it's like with me, and that's another thing so many people in my church were pointing out, like, they were just praying that I would be aware of, like, the love God had for me, the unconditional love. Yeah. And I remember, like, at a college kind of ministry camp thing I was at, like, college ministry retreat I was at with the church I went to in college. This guest pastor I didn't know just walked up to me, and he was just like, God likes you. Like, I just want you to know. Aww. And I was just, like, kind of offended, because it's like, bro, I've been raised in church. Like, I already know, like, God likes me. Like, duh. Like, what are you saying? But, like, the more and more I thought of that over the years, especially, like, after I hit rock bottom after college, and, like, other people were always, like, praying that over me, like, that I would be aware, like, God's love. Yeah. Because perfect love casts out fear. Yeah. Imposter syndrome is fear. Needing to validate yourself and feel significant. That's all based out of fear. And, like, knowing you are loved opens up that abundance, opens up not needing to strive, because you're rooted in, like, who you are. And, like, you realize you are not your art. Yeah. And that sets you free to really create. Yeah. Something magical, so it's the journey I've been on. So I guess, what are the takeaways? What have you learned from this journey of, like, reflecting on your upbringing and everything you had to unlearn when it comes to how you relate to your art?
Well, what you were kind of saying at the end is definitely part of it. Like knowing, falling in love with God has to be first, because life flows out of all of that. You got to know that God is your Father, and His love is unconditional, like you said. And unfortunately, a lot of us really don't even know what that means, because, we live in a fallen world and our parents aren't perfect. And there's so many other things that reinforce the opposite of unconditional love. And so it's hard to genuinely, we may get it mentally, but it's hard to genuinely believe that.
Yeah. Or like even wrap our head around it.
Exactly. It's just like, no, God really does want to see you thriving and living and healthy. And that has to be a desperate prayer, because that's at the heart of having a relationship with God, is knowing that He loves you, like that's why Jesus died for us, so that we can know God, so that we can have that relationship, so that we can have eternal life, which is being in God, which is being in Christ. So that's priority, like creative or not. Yeah. You got to know that.
Yeah.
A thing that would come to my mind a lot, especially in college and the years after college, is just remembering, when I get in that restless mode, or I'm getting impatient, or I'm getting kind of antsy, and I'm like, I gotta make something. What am I about right now? Like, just remembering that's not the spirit of the Holy Spirit. That's not joy. That's not gentleness. That's not kindness, goodness.
Yeah.
Like, that's if that's what's like, that to me is a symbol of like, okay, this isn't from God, because God wouldn't be leading me in such a way where
anxiety is being induced.
Yeah, like that's not how
hurriedness.
Yeah, that's not the leading of the Holy Spirit. So that's a big one for me. I think that's like one of the first things I texted you like early in our friendship. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I know it's along those lines.
I don't remember
that. Another big one, knowing what your why is. And that is a whole conversation that we will have. That's a different episode. But as a little preview, it's basically just knowing yourself. Like, you need to know yourself. You need to know your core values, knowing your gifts, knowing where you're being called, and how all of that comes together, and basically creating sort of this vision and this narrative for yourself, so that it becomes very clear, what your path is, and it may not be super like 2020 vision clear, but it will be, if you come back to it regularly, it will become more clear. So getting that why and knowing what you're about according to God, prayerfully asking for that why, and prayerfully discerning when you look at your past experiences. That's how you eventually get to that. I don't want to spoil too much, but that's super important. And finally, just some practical things, like for me, I like you were saying, a lot of creatives work in that sort of burst of energy. That's very me. And sometimes I have that burst of energy, but there's nothing to do. And so I gotta I need to pray, or I need to journal or something. I may need to cry, because I have I'm just very, I don't even want to say it. I just have a lot of emotionalness, even if it's not sadness, but it's just there. And I'm like, let me cry or something, or journal, or just vent or talk. I've been going on a lot of walks lately, doing that. Or doing it physically, so maybe exercising. I love swimming, dancing. Just putting that energy towards something healthy that is restorative. And not sort of, and not driving to Michael's 15 minutes before it closed. That's not a good use. a good use of your energy. Or even art therapy, especially like ceramics or embroidery, like doing something. I love doing creative things that are like not for any kind of, there's no goal, you know, it's just literally I'm just there to enjoy it. And I love ceramics for that. I love some forms of painting for that. I love embroidery for that. Things where you're really in the moment and just experiencing the moment without asking anything from it. Yeah, those would be my main takeaways.
Yeah, I really like abstract drawing from that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do it with pen too, because I can't erase or think about it. Just keep.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I feel like you hit pretty much all of them, but like when we talk about not only like, you know, reflecting on your upbringing and realizing how that affects how you relate to your art, but it really comes down to like, are you creating from a place of love and fullness? Are you creating from a place of ego and void? And what you mentioned about like the fruits of the spirit, like if you haven't read that part of the Bible, I would suggest Googling it. It really is like the key to knowing, like, is this the Spirit of God? Like,
that's Galatians 5, by the way.
Yeah.
In case you want to go read that.
Yeah. Love, joy, peace, patience, long suffering. It's like if you're feeling the opposite of those things, then you're probably creating from a place of ego or fear, void, needing to prove something to yourself or someone else because you're comparing yourself. But if you're feeling joy, love, peace, if you feel like you're creating from rest, then it's like you're good to go. You're in a healthy place creatively, and I think that's all where we want to be. We may not know how to articulate that, but that's where we want to be. And it comes from like kind of like Matthew 6:33, like seek first the kingdom of God and all these things will come.
Yeah. It's that verse is like
your creativity.
The church says that so much that sometimes it loses its meaning.
It's one of those things I have to always remind
myself.
Myself.
But it's like it very much is true. Can I tell a short story again about my little feeling zine?
Yeah.
Because you're saying creating out of a place of love. And this is such a good example of that because, first of all, this was just going to be for me. Like, it was just, I started just writing down a bunch of things that I felt spoke to me and doing that for like a year or two. And it got to the point where I was like regularly referencing back to it. So much that I didn't need to look at it anymore. I kind of like memorized different parts of it. And I was like, oh, it would be cool to like make a little book for me. Because I love book binding and like having little small things to carry around. And eventually God was like, this is cool. This is for you. But you should share this. Like, don't hoard this to yourself.
Yeah.
And that was over the course of like 2 or 3 years. You know, it wasn't like bursts of energy. Very even. Very like a lot of listening to the spirit. Yeah. And so when I finally got to the visuals, my sort of knee-jerk reaction, going back to that Frankensteining inspiration, I was just like pulling a bunch of things I thought was cool. So a lot of like pink and like unicorn looking things that was like horrible. It would have been horrible. And it looked cool, but it wasn't resonating. And I was like, God, I need you to come through on the visuals, which for me was very new. I've never, like, the concept obviously was from God, but I was like, I need you to actually be in like a color palette. Like, we need to get specific. And I think it was literally Easter morning one day, and I opened my Bible app, and they have this really cool feature where they do stories now, and it's like,
yeah, I saw that.
You've seen those? Yeah. And it's hard to describe, but it basically was like a video of just the sky and like the clouds coming through, and then the words appear, but it's like the background is white, but then the words are the clouds, like kind of masking out the white. thought that was so beautiful, and it made me feel so peaceful because I was like up really early, and I was like, this is it. Like I want, like, what I'm experiencing right now, looking at this verse in the form of clouds and stuff. I was like, this is what I want my zine to feel like when people read it. And so then I started, going for blues and purples and cool colors and making everything very cloudy looking through watercolors and things like that. And I love it now. It's so much better than, neon pink, which is what I tend to default to. But yeah, God cares about the details. God can actually be in your creative process. It just takes practice, takes listening. Yeah, we talk about that more in other episodes. I won't go in, but I just want to say it's possible.
Yeah, so good. Trust God, and like the more you get to know him and his character, his nature, his voice, the more you know you're being led by him, and not just your creativity, but in all aspects of your life. And I think that's kind of what is like a reoccurring theme in this episode.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming to our little cozy
abode
nook.
Please look at those other episodes.
Yeah, check those other episodes out. It's all connected. It's all related. If you resonate with this, you definitely will resonate with like at least 5 other ones. So
yeah.
All right. Until next time.
Create healthily. All right. Thank you for listening to today's episode.
You can check out the show notes and the description for anything we may have talked about in today's conversation.
And if you like what you heard, like, comment, or subscribe. And leave a review too.
Until next time, you guys, grace and peace.